All right, let's talk about one of the most frustrating things a student can hear from their teacher. And that thing is, hey, go home and practice this. Let's assume that the student actually knows what they're supposed to do, which actually can sometimes be a massive if. Do they know how to do what they're supposed to do? If you tell them go home and practice, do they even know what you mean? Like in detail. And by the way, this isn't just frustrating for students, it's actually really frustrating for teachers too, because if you tell your students to go practice and you know what you mean, and they come back and they haven't done it that way, super irritating. But here's the thing, do your students know the practice map? Now, there's a lot of reasons that practice is hard, and we're going to get into it in future videos, particularly why it's hard in the brain sometimes. We're going to dive really deep into that in videos 2 and 3. But for right now, let's just talk about, does your student know what practice means in terms of how to get from A to B to C to D to E? In other words, do they know what it means to be on a journey of practice? This actually really hits home for me because I am out of town a lot. I grew up here where I live right now, but I was just, for example, in Rochester, New York, which is on completely the other end of the country for me. And if somebody said, hey, go over to this place, I would say, okay, I know what to do. I go, I get my stuff together, I walk, but where do I walk? And that's happening to a ton of students in practice right now. They don't know what it means to actually go and practice. Now, this is the practice map. This is what it looks like. You can actually get this as a free resource at the IAM.academy, and you can get it as a poster that you can put up in your classrooms or your studios or wherever you want to. But let's go over it really quick. The first point in the practice map is called unconscious incompetence. Now, what that means is they literally don't know what they can't do, right? That is a whole area in itself that your students have to know exists and what comes up. They not only have to know that it exists, they have to know what happens when you're unconsciously incompetent. The next point in the map is conscious incompetence. This is where you know exactly what it is that you can't do. Now, there's lots of emotions, lots of things that you need to know when you're consciously incompetent. Have you helped your students know what to do in that space? The third area of the practice map, and the longest, and arguably the one that we spend most of our time in as musicians, is conscious competence. That means that you can do it. You are competent, but you have to be conscious. You have to be thinking the entire time that you're doing it. That is what most of us think of when we think of as practice. Now, that is a long area of the map because you spend most of your time there. Have you taught your students how to be consciously competent well? The fourth area of the map is one of the sweetest. It's unconscious competence. It's where you can do something without thinking. So I can unconsciously, competently bring a fork to my mouth and walk. But the sweetest part of the map is the very end. And it's something that's really unique to artists and musicians and anybody who's doing something creatively, and that's sublimity. Now, we're going to get into sublimity really deeply when we get into the video on the brain, but essentially what it is it's when you can do something so well without thinking that you can attach your emotions to it. Now, how can you help your students this week to start learning this practice map? Because the best musicians, and honestly the best people, they're not just aware of this map, they actually have run this map over and over and over and over. They are so well aware of this terrain. Okay, but once your students have this, what other blocks are there to practice? Well, stay tuned for next week's video and we'll let you know.